Good evening, and welcome to the Broadbent Institute's Progress Gala, a digital celebration of hope. Thank you for tuning in tonight from across Canada and around the world. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, which is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, but I'd also like to recognize that you're joining us from many places, near and far, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. I don't need to tell you that 2020 continues to be a very strange and tumultuous year. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has wreaked havoc on our lives, on our families, and our communities, and on the wider economy. On behalf of the Broadbent Institute staff and board of directors, we send our sincere thanks to those working so hard to protect us, and our sympathies to all of you who've been negatively impacted. In a normal year, the Broadbent Institute would be hosting the Progress Gala in Toronto with a crowd of hundreds of people. But clearly nothing is normal at the moment, and that is impossible. But we've put together an event tonight with a lineup of gifted speakers and storytellers to bring a positive and a hopeful message in these tough times. One upside of doing this event digitally is that we have the largest crowd we've ever had tuning in to a Broadbent Institute event. The proceeds from tonight's event, and it is a fundraiser, will go towards the Broadbent Institute's ongoing work to make Canada a fairer, greener, and more democratic place. We are determined that the COVID recovery needs to build back better than before. We need to ensure that our public services, who are working so hard at the moment, are strengthened and expanded. The recovery needs to include a green transition, creating jobs and reducing carbon pollution. And as we wrestle with who pays for the recovery, we must hold to the principle that the less fortunate are protected and that the wealthier and more powerful contribute their fair share. To find out more about these and other critical issues, our upcoming training and education sessions, and to read our amazing media project, Press Progress, please take a moment now to follow the Institute and Press Progress on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. In fact, tonight, we want to spread the message far and wide, so please post up a storm on all your social feeds. You can tag at Broadbent and use the hashtag ProgressGala2020. Tonight's event has been produced in partnership with the Walrus Talks series and made possible through the generosity of our sponsors. Please stay tuned now for a video thank you to those sponsors. Following this, you'll hear from our title sponsor, Mark Hancock, the National President of the Canadian Union of Public Employees. Thank you very much, everyone. Settle back, get a drink, let's get started.
The Broadbent Institute is pleased to thank all of our sponsors for tonight's event, a digital celebration of hope. Thanks to the support of these sponsors, the Broadbent Institute is able to provide high-quality educational and inspiring programming tonight and throughout the year. Thank you to our title sponsor, CUPE National. Our speaker sponsors, United Steelworkers of Canada, United Food and Commercial Workers of Canada, International Association of Firefighters of Canada, Unifor. Our event sponsors, AMAPSIO, the National Union of Public and General Employees, Facebook, Labatt Breweries, Cavan Advertising, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, Earnscliffe Strategies. Our event host sponsors. And lastly, all of our founding sponsors who support our incredible work throughout the year. Thank you.
Good evening, my friends. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci, Rick. Thank you very much, Rick, for that kind introduction. It's a great honor for us at CUPE to be title sponsor for this year's Progress Gala. And it's my pleasure to bring greetings to all of you on behalf of our 700,000 CUPE members from coast to coast to coast. Je vous salue toutes et tous au nom de 700,000 membres de SAFP. This has been a challenging year for everyone, all across our country and around the world. But as a movement, progressives in Canada still have a lot to be hopeful about this year. So even though we're gathering from our home offices and our kitchen tables this time round, it is so important that we're here together tonight to learn the lessons from our shared struggles and to find hope and inspiration in our shared victories. For us at CUPE, we've seen some hard times in recent months as our members have continued to work on the front lines during this pandemic. Our members are healthcare workers in hospitals and in long-term care homes. They're paramedics and emergency responders. They're education assistants and childcare workers looking after our kids. They're bus drivers and transportation workers, making sure other essential employees get to work on time. They're social service workers, keeping folks in group homes and shelters safe. They're the hydro and water workers who have kept the lights on and the taps running. When it seemed like the whole world was shutting down, our members headed to work to keep their communities afloat. When the pandemic hit, public services were there for Canadians, and we're damn proud of that. And let me tell you, my friends, we don't plan on letting governments forget about it anytime soon. Even as this crisis highlighted just how badly governments have been shortchanging our public services, I am convinced that we will come out of this better and stronger on the other side. Canadians have been watching, and an overwhelming majority of them now believe that the time has come. The time has come to end profiteering off the backs of our seniors and finally fix long-term care in this country by making it public. They believe that quality, affordable childcare is something that every parent should be able to count on. And they believe that the time has come for a national single-payer public pharmacare program so that no one goes broke trying to cover the cost of their prescriptions. And I'm hopeful because I think that we have the best shot in more than a generation of making these things a reality in the months ahead. I'm hopeful because I know folks like you are just as committed as we are to making life better for working people all across this country. It's the strength of our collective determination that gives me hope. Together, we're a powerful force, and together, there is so much that we can achieve. And on that note, my friends, it's my pleasure to introduce somebody who probably doesn't need much of an introduction at all. Chers amis, il me fait grand plaisir de vous présenter une personne qui j'admire beaucoup. He's someone I've looked up to personally over many, many years, as a member of Parliament and a leader of the NDP, as an educator and companion of the Order of Canada. He's someone who's been bringing hope and inspiration to people across this country for longer than I can remember. And tonight's event and the work that continues under his leadership of the Broadbent Institute are both a testament to his commitment to democracy and social justice in our country. Un grand militant pour la démocratie et la justice sociale. Without further ado, my friends, it's my profound honor to introduce Mr. Ed Broadbent.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Progress Gala. And thank you, Mark, for those kind words, and thank you, CUPE, for your support for this event and for your long-standing partnership. It's because of organizations like CUPE and other sponsors tonight that the Broadbent Institute is able to do its research, training, and advocacy at this critical time. It's an honor to stand with you today and every day. I look forward to this event every year as an opportunity to reconnect with old friends and meet some new ones. Of course, as with most things in our lives, the pandemic requires that we do things differently in 2020. Though we're not able to come together over a meal, we have worked hard to put together a different sort of community gathering, a gala event that brings together friends and supporters from across Canada and from around the world, and that nourishes us, albeit in a virtual way. The theme of this evening is celebrating hope. Hope has been a constant theme of the human experience across all cultures and through the ages. The great Persian poet and scholar, Rumi, tells us that where there is a ruin, there is hope for a treasure. And the British Romantic poet Tennyson wrote, "Hope smiles from the threshold of the year to come, whispering it will be happier." Given the stress and turmoil of the past year, the notion of better times ahead resonates deeply. But for me, and certainly at this difficult time, the hope that I carry isn't just for the future, it's for the here and now. The hope that I feel is urgent. The hope that I feel is a battery pack, an energy source that powers the actions necessary to heal a troubled world. It was hope that drove our American friends to their important victory on November 3rd. And it was hope that re-elected John Horgan as Premier of British Columbia with an enormously progressive agenda and the highest popular vote in recent memory. And again, it's hope that propels the movement for Black lives in their fight against historic injustices and for a more just society. The pandemic has intensified the challenges that we face, and it has clarified the stakes. The COVID recovery that we build together has to include an end to systemic racism. It needs to result in a climate change plan that both creates jobs and reduces carbon, and it must mark an end to the yawning gap between the rich and the poor that has been growing shamefully for decade after decade. One way to accomplish a few of these goals simultaneously is to improve our public services, including through an expansion of our shared institutions such as long-term care, daycare, and universal pharmacare. Achieving these won't be easy, but we know the vast majority of Canadians want these changes and recognize their vital importance. As our friend Jack Layton reminded us, though sometimes it takes a while, love, hope, and optimism will triumph in the end. As we celebrate hope this evening, let's remember that hope isn't something to be consumed. Hope is something that we give each other. The speakers that you will hear from tonight build hope every day, and I eagerly anticipate their very different and very inspiring stories. It's a pleasure to be co-hosting this event with one of Canada's great institutions, the Walrus. Here now is our friend, hopeful advocate in her own right, the Executive Director of Walrus, Jennifer Hollett. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Ed, Rick, and the Broadbent Institute. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Hollett, the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'm excited to welcome you all to Canada's Conversation. We are thrilled to be joining you virtually for the Walrus Talks at Home at the Broadbent Institute's 2020 Progress Gala. It's of course a little different this year, but it's wonderful to bring together people from across the country and beyond for this special event and such important ideas. The Walrus started 17 years ago really as an optimistic project to tell stories and foster conversation across Canada. And we do this in a number of ways through fact-based journalism in our print publication, The Walrus. I have props. Also online at thewalrus.ca, through our podcast, The Conversation Piece, and in public events like this one, the Walrus Talks, which is now the Walrus Talks at Home. And this work is powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. So thank you, all of you, for being here, and to the Broadbent Institute for inviting us to participate in this year's Progress Gala. The Walrus Talks brings together thought leaders to share their thoughts and unique perspectives on a topic that is important to Canadians. And tonight, our speakers are sharing their stories on the theme, "The Moment I Realized I Could Change the World." And for me, that moment was in St. Catharines, Ontario, when I was in grade 8. I would walk to and from school with my best friend, Melissa. And we were walking home and often got cut off by cars, and they would honk or kind of go like this, and it was really frustrating because we didn't know they were going to be turning in front of us because they weren't using their indicators. So one day enough was enough, and we decided to do something about it. And keep in mind that most kids in grade 8 are very focused on being cool, but like this is what we were focused on. And we got a white piece of poster board and a black marker, and we wrote our message. And then one day after school, the two of us held our poster and we marched down the streets, and our sign said, "Please use your indicators." Now, it wasn't a particularly effective campaign. I remember one woman in her car smiled. I don't know if it changed anything, but for us it mattered because we realized that we could do something, and there was hope that we could change something. Now, that campaign, I think, should live on as a cyclist in downtown Toronto. Please use your indicators. And it ultimately inspired both of us to pursue careers dedicated to improving the world. Melissa campaigns for animal welfare, and I work in media, and I've also spent time in tech and in politics. So these moments really matter. Now, I'm excited to hear similar stories, those moments tonight, from our speakers. This is how it works. Our speakers are going to have 7 minutes. We're going to hear from Sandy Hudson, organizer and writer, Valerie Plante, Mayor of Montreal, Anand Gurdadas, writer, editor, political analyst, Wab Rice, author and journalist, and Jan Arden, singer, songwriter, broadcast, actor, and author. I'm looking forward to this. Thanks to everyone for being a part of it.
My name is Sandy Hudson, and I'm so happy to be with you folks today. I am the founder of Black Lives Matter in Canada. I do a little podcast called SAIRYŌ Talk Politics, and generally I have been involved in activism for a really long time. And so I'm here to tell you folks when it was that I first realized that I could change the world. And as I often do, I'm going to break the rules a little bit and maybe tell you 2 stories, not just one, but 2 stories about how I realized that I had some power to change the world, and we all do. So hopefully this helps you folks realize that same power within yourselves. Okay, so imagine this. I am in undergrad. My first year of undergrad, I had decided to start post-secondary education in the computer science program. I was thinking I was going to be a software engineer. And you might think that's unexpected, but in high school, I was kind of a polymath, and I was trying to decide, do I want to do journalism or do I want to do programming? And I thought to myself, whatever I get the highest mark in, that's going to be my future, and did really well in computer programming. And so that's where I went. That's where I ended up. And while I was in the program, I figured out something that I didn't know before going into university. As someone from a first generation student, as they call it, I just didn't have all of the information about what would happen after my first year. And so I was told that the tuition for my second year was going to be about double what it was in my first year. if I wanted to continue on in computer science. And I was stunned. I didn't know about that. And I was already receiving the maximum amount of OSAP. I already had 3 jobs. I was already falling asleep in my computer logic class after having spent a really long night being a cashier at Zeller's. It was really frustrating. And I thought, how am I going to do this? My entire future is thrown up into the air. So I thought, okay, I'll go to the Students' Union. I have heard that the Students' Union is a place where maybe they can find me a scholarship or a grant or figure this out for me in some way so I don't have to drop out of my program. Walked down to the Student Union office, feeling really nervous, hoping that maybe there was something there. And there was not. They did not have any such scholarships or grants, but the person that I spoke to was like, what we do have is a rally coming up in just a few weeks to protest high tuition fees and to get the government to freeze tuition or reduce the fees. And I was like, protest. Okay, the only protest I'd ever been to at that point in my life was in the year 2000, the Stop the War protests, the big ones that happened all over the world. And I was like, I just don't know about this. I'm not sure if this is gonna be impactful in any way. I was very skeptical. And the person I spoke to was like, look, just why don't you come out to an organizing meeting? You might like what you see. You might want to even get involved and become a volunteer. So I went to an organizing meeting, and this is like maybe 3 weeks out to the event. And there was maybe 10 people in the room. I was like, okay, so these 10 people are going to plan a protest that is then going to convince the government to do something about fees. I was even more skeptical, but something in me kept going to these meetings. I didn't say much, it was really just observing. And then the day of the rally came around. I think there was somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 students out on the street. And I was like, how? How did those 10 people in a room get this many people to come out and put boots on the ground and demand better from the government? And then shortly afterwards, a few days, I believe afterwards, the government announced a two-year freeze on tuition fees. I was blown away. I was like, okay, I may not be doing computer science, but I need to learn everything I can about how to wield power like that. I want to know how those few people in a room managed to convince the government and to convince policymakers that this change was necessary, that this change was possible, and to actually bring it about. Fast forward to 2014, after all of that time, and from about 2003, 2004 to 2014, I became a student activist, and I was doing a lot of student activism work. And in 2014, I was also reeling from the news of Michael Brown's murder by the police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. I was reeling from the news of Jermaine Carby's murder from Officer Ryan Reed in Peel Region. And, I wasn't seeing a lot of solidarity actions being planned in Toronto. And everyone who I knew was part of the Black community was asking one another, like, where are these solidarity actions? When is it going to happen? What can we do? How can we support? And I knew that there were activists in the United States from Black Lives Matter who had called on people all over the world to do solidarity actions in November. And I'm looking around and I'm asking my friends, and we cannot find anything. And in one of these conversations, which I was having with my brother, he was like, yeah, have you heard anything? Do you know, maybe Dundas Square or something? And I said, no, I haven't heard anything. I'm really disappointed. Like I can't find a solidarity action anywhere in Toronto. And then he says to me, well, yeah, I don't know what you're waiting for though. Like you have all of these skills. Don't you think you could plan something? And that was like really quite a challenge to me. I was like, why is it that I'm waiting for somebody else to do this? Like I really, for some reason, thought, my space is student stuff and someone else will come along and do this stuff. But no, that challenge really challenged me to see that sometimes we really are the ones that we're waiting for. And that's a quote by June Jordan, a Black feminist poet. And I contacted all of the people that I knew who were Black organizers on Facebook, and I said, hey, would you be willing to help support a solidarity action in Toronto? People were like, hell yeah. And we had about 2 days to plan something. And then we started getting contacted by people all over the country. In those 2 days, I'm an experienced activist. I know what we planned for. We planned for maybe a rally that would bring out 50 people. On the day of the rally, 3,000 people, over 3,000 people showed up to protest outside the U.S. consulate. The killing of Michael Brown and also the killing of Jermaine Carby. And there were solidarity actions from Vancouver to Ottawa to Halifax and in places in between. And I really, that action really taught me to never limit myself, that I could always have some sort of powerful impact on our ability to change the world.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Valérie Plante, mairesse de Montréal. I think that the first time I realized that things were not exactly the same depending of who you are is when I realized that in where I'm from, which is Abitibi-Témiscamingue, it was not the same if you were an Aboriginal or a non-native person. White people I felt like we were all together, and it was an easy access to certain things where I felt the native communities were kind of on the side and we didn't talk to each other. But though I was young, I felt like they were not the same and they were not treated the same. But it took a long time before I actually pinned down on, oh, okay, this is what discrimination means or even colonization means. So quickly when I was young, I realized that I was quite sensitive, and injustice, small injustice or big ones, did hurt me a lot. And so I felt that I had two choices in life. One choice was to kind of feel oppressed by this, the feeling that there's nothing I could do, and to kind of go in my bed and cry all day, or I could actually take action. So my way of dealing with injustice and sometimes a feeling that, oh my God, it is so huge, how are we going to deal with that or solve that? I decided to go with action. So I go out and I volunteer, and I'm outside marching. And then I got involved into a political party, and now I'm mayor. But it's definitely into this kind of taking action in my own hands, dealing with what I find difficult and struggles that I find difficult to deal with. My first experience is when I was a teenager. I started to volunteer in an elder home. And I felt like it was such a rewarding place to be, and I didn't do much, to be honest. I was just there smiling, being nice, offering help, and I really felt, it felt useful. And it was my first experience just saying, oh, giving to others, being sensible to other people actually is a good feeling, and it seems like people are feeling good about it as well. So though I started to volunteer quite young, I have to say that once I got to college and then university, that I felt like I could definitely contribute to different causes, and being surrounded with a lot of people. Before it was more solitary volunteering, where now it was being activist. And the first one of the cause that I supported was the fight for very low or lower tuition fees for the university. There was things around climate, about having clean water, about peace as well. So I was really involved. But I think for me what was great is to be with a group of people where not only would we march, but we would also discuss and bring new ideas and see how can we make this important cause being heard, which is always a challenge. My first success, one of the first success I've had as an activist, was when a group of women decided to work together and to create a training for women in women's shelters, women's organization that would be about how the globalization of the economy impacts women differently. And it was a big deal because we had jobs and we were going to universities and having our life, but we decided to take that very serious subject and to create something that would be accessible for women in shelters. So yeah, we did that work and I'm really proud of that. Definitely, I think that when you have that type of successes of being together and put our forces together is definitely, I think it was probably one of the game changer or a place where I said, okay, I can actually have an impact on my community, in my society, and there's different ways to do it. So activism has been a big part of how I used to see myself how activism is a way to change the world, for sure. And now, of course, it has evolved. Now I'm mayor. I definitely want to fight against climate change and how it is slowly affecting us. Slowly, but not that slowly, actually. And even more strongly every year, or the pace is quite, is getting more intense. So I'm definitely thinking about my kids and maybe my possible grandchildren and other people's, children. This is what motivates me when I think about everything that needs to be done for climate change. And it's not an easy one because at the municipal level, I'm quite limited. It's not like I have the tools and the power to, create the real changes that needs to be done. That being said, I'm definitely doing my part, and we're being quite audacious about that. But it is a subject that I really care about. A lot of things matters to me, but if there's one motivation, one thing that kind of helps me to go through everything is this idea of leaving no one behind. Even when I was volunteering, I was young, I was thinking about the elders being isolated. I didn't like that. Or even when I was thinking about those students that cannot go to school because it was too expensive, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't like injustice. And again, is how now that I'm mayor, how do I make sure that I can create the right projects or program policies that will assure as much as I can that no one is left behind. And even in my strong belief on climate change and how important it is to act, I have to say, most of the time, the first thing that I think of is, how do we make sure that even this fight against climate change, and as the world is changing, how do we make sure that it's not the most vulnerable that are still behind, that it will still be the most affected? This is really what motivates me in life.
Hi, I'm Anand Girdhardas, and I'm a writer based in New York. So a few years ago, about 9 years ago, I was invited into a secret society. I got a phone call late at night, maybe 11 at night, too late to call anybody, but this is how secret societies work if you're not in one. I got this call inviting me to be part of the Aspen Institute, and as a fellowship. And the idea was that, if you were youngish, as a young leaders program, you were under 40, they thought maybe you were a kind of person who could make change in the world, you should join this fellowship. The fellowship was actually mostly for business people. And I am not a business person. In fact, I work in the worst business on earth, which is writing. That said, I got this call because, fellowships of 20 business people in a room could be a little bit tedious, as you understand if you've ever been in a business meeting. So I was drawn into this thing. They invited me to join as kind of the Indian spice in the mix. I said yes, and I joined this fellowship. And the purpose of the fellowship was to change the world and to kind of do some readings as a group and commune together and share with each other to try to move, as one of our teachers called it, from success to significance. The idea was you've done some things in the world, you gotta be more significant. You gotta paint on a bigger canvas. You gotta do more for the big problems of our age. So I was in this thing. And it was a lovely experience with very nice people. But as I got deeper into this secret society, not benign, I shouldn't actually say benign, but benevolent, open secret society of the Aspen Institute, I started to notice a strange thing about this community that was talking about changing the world that actually I realized also applies to a lot of communities that talk about changing the world, which is that when we had these larger get-togethers of this fellowship, not just the 20 people, but the hundreds of people who'd been through this program in the past or had been through different countries, clones of this program, that when we got together, a lot of the people I was in the room with had flown in to Aspen, which is very beautiful, had flown into Aspen from helping to cause a lot of the problems that they then flew to Aspen to help solve. To give some examples, there were people in this group who, came to Aspen to talk about how do we make tech work for all? What a beautiful question. Absolutely splendid question. Some of those people had just flown in from helping to make Silicon Valley monopolies as top people in those companies more entrenched in their power, more connected, and frankly, more immune from any kind of regulation of their enabling of disinformation, sowing chaos in democracy, spreading hate. Or there were, folks talking about how do we have health in America? What a wonderful question, truly beautiful question. It did dawn on me that some of those people were, CEOs of the biggest, soft drink manufacturers in America. So their day job was really to just shorten people's lives, but then they flew to Aspen to talk about making them longer. There were people in the group who, worked for the biggest banks in the world, Goldman Sachs and others. And there they were, beautiful, beautiful questions asked by them in Aspen. How do we empower, African-American communities to have more home ownership? Wow, what a absolutely marvelous question. The issue is some of those people had been involved in institutions that had done everything in their power in the subprime crisis and everything it led to tank the world economy for those people. And so not only were the people I was in the room with starting to become a little questionable to me, this notion of changing the world, but a lot of the rooms themselves were questionable. One of the rooms was named after Booz Allen Hamilton, a military contractor. Another of the buildings that we were in fact, that room was in a building called the Coke Seminar Building, named not after the beverage, which is problematic, but after the brothers, which are not just doubly, but I would say squared problematic. And so I began to wonder what happens when some of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world appoint themselves the changers of the world. What's going on? And I think what began to dawn on me was that this way of talking about changing the world that was happening in this community, that happens in many communities, is the proffering of a kind of fake change by folks like these, creates a screen behind which those same people can not only not change or not atone properly for what they have done, but actually continue doing it. And so that was a difficult realization and something that started to grate on me. I raised my voice about it at different moments. But the moment that I decided to actually do something about it was when they asked me to give a talk in one of our annual reunions. This was not unusual, actually. We had a kind of ethic of not having outside speakers. Everybody gave a talk at a different moment or sat on a panel or moderated something or played a song or showed their movie. It was my turn. They asked me to give a talk about a book I'd written about forgiveness. And I got up there and I did not give that talk. I told them I'd give the talk, but I said it'd be a little different. It was very different. And I got up there and I basically decided to give a talk about what happens when you think you're making change. You think you're solving the world's problems, but in fact you are the world's problems. And I gave that speech to a room full of about 300 or 400 people who in many ways were confused, had confused themselves into thinking they were the solution to the problems that they also were, who had confused themselves into thinking that generosity by them was a substitute for the injustices they perpetrated every day, who had confused themselves into thinking that making a difference was a cover for making a killing in ways that defrauded the communities they lived in and the planet they live on, who had distorted, confused themselves and distorted our understanding of change by promoting fake change so that we would almost have amnesia about what real change is. And I gave the speech. I got a weird mix of a standing ovation and icy stares. Later that night at the bar, a guy called me an asshole while shaking my hand. He was in private equity, also lives in Greenwich. And it went on from there. That talk, that moment became the seed of my book, Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world. And I wrote it because I think before we can actually change the world, we have to clear the brush of bullshit that is getting in the way of so much real change. Thank you.
Bonjour, Wabgijik Dijnikas, Makwat Nodem, Wasaksing Donchaba. Hi, my name is Wabgijik Rice. I'm a member of the Bear Clan of the Nishnabek of Wasaksing First Nation, beautiful island on Georgian Bay. And I'm an author and a journalist who currently lives in Sudbury, Ontario with my wife and 2 sons. The moment I realized that I could help make change in the world was when I learned that journalism was a viable career option for me and that I could help bring communities together through the written word. And I largely came into journalism by fluke. Growing up in the 1980s and 1990s, I wasn't aware of the many trailblazing Indigenous journalists who were doing very important work at the time. And you know, back then, Canadian news media was very much doing a very poor job of reflecting the realities of Indigenous issues and communities in this country. Thankfully, we've seen some improvements in recent years, but back then it was way worse. And the news media world seemed like an entirely different realm for me that I wasn't sure I even belonged in. But thankfully, I ended up as a journalist for a long time, and I'll tell you the story of how I got there. So, back in the 1990s, I was in high school and I was an honor student all throughout, yet I didn't really know what I wanted to do for a post-secondary journey or even a career after that. You know, I really loved creative writing. I really loved reading. I enjoyed all my history, geography, everything else courses, but there just wasn't anybody steering me in any direction or getting me onto any certain path, despite all the resourceful and admirable Indigenous people who were doing great things for me. I just wasn't shown within the education system how I would go about carving out a career path. So I was kind of wandering aimlessly through my last couple years of high school, you know, just not knowing what to do. And fortunately, one day I was walking through the halls of Parry Sound High School in my second last year of high school, and I saw a flyer up for the Rotary International Student Exchange program. And it was an information session coming up in the school that week. So I made sure to make time for going to that session that day. And I went and checked it out and learned all about how the Rotary Student Exchange Program works. Basically, you're selected to go to a foreign country for a year. You spend time with multiple families and you go to school and you learn about the culture and the language and so on. And I thought it sounded like a really cool opportunity because, again, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I told my parents that I really wanted to do it because it was, you know, an exciting prospect at the time. And they were very supportive. They thought it was a good idea too. You know, they wanted me to make the most of any opportunity then. And we started this really long application process to get into the program. So after a while, I was selected to go to Germany for a year. And this was in 1996 when I was 17 years old. So we had a lot of preparations to make, a lot of orientation to do. You know, I had some German to learn. I had a bunch of tapes that I maybe didn't listen to as much as I should have prior to leaving because, you know, I was spending as much time as possible with my friends and family because I wasn't going to see them for a year. But that was just part of the whole process of getting ready to go on this life-changing experience. And out of the blue, about a month before I was to fly out, I was contacted by the editor of a newspaper called the Anishinaabe News, published by the Anishinaabe Nation. And it serves, you know, First Nations throughout central and northern Ontario. And the editor of the paper at the time was a guy named Dave Dale. And he said that he had heard I was going on this exchange program and that he wasn't familiar with many youth from our region, you know, doing, you know, international opportunities like this. And he wondered if I'd be interested in writing about my experience as well in Germany as an Anishinaabe youth for the newspaper. And they would print my articles every month. And I thought that sounded like a great idea. I really loved writing, as I mentioned, and, you know, would be a great opportunity for me to document, you know, my time over there. And he said, every time we print one of your articles, we'll pay you $100. And that totally blew my mind because I didn't know that you could actually get paid to write back then. Again, despite all the great trailblazing people who were doing important journalism work from Indigenous communities, right? I just didn't see that as, you know, a way for me to channel my own skills and make a career out of it. But here I had this opportunity that really opened my eyes to this wide realm of journalistic storytelling. So about a week after I got there in Germany was my first day of school. So I was essentially thrown into the fire right away. I was in northern Germany, going to school in a little town called Braca, which is not far from the North Sea. It's part of the German lowlands, maritime climate, lots of agriculture there, very distinct landscape and region and society compared to where I was from. And I was just really excited to get it going, although I was very nervous, again, because I didn't know that much German and I wasn't sure what awaited me within the education system, right? So the host sister of the first family I stayed with was also a student at the high school I was going to be going to, also called the gymnasium over there. And she drove me up to school that first day. And I was painfully nervous because, you know, I wasn't sure what to expect in terms of the German school experience. I didn't really speak German yet. And I didn't know how my own experience as a high school student in Canada could relate or benefit me there, right? So we drove up, she parked, we were close to the front door. And as we arrived, I saw all these kids just sort of standing in front of the school, you know, and just milling about. I couldn't really tell what they were doing. And it kind of made me a little more nervous because I knew I was going to have to walk through them to get to class. So we got out of the car and I closed the door, and as soon as it clicked shut, so we got out of the car and I closed the door, and as soon as the door clicked shut, they all turned around and locked eyes on me. All these kids who were very much, you know, Aryan looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, saw me, you know, close the door of the car and start walking towards the school. And they were watching me the whole time I was coming up to the front door. And I thought, oh no, is this some kind of initiation? I didn't read about this in any of the literature that I was given beforehand about going to school in Germany. And I was even more nervous about my arrival there. But as I got closer, I saw that they were all, you know, friendly. They were all smiling and they started walking towards me. And by the time we'd all met up, they began introducing themselves in English to me, saying, you know, you must be Wob. Welcome to our school. Welcome to Germany. We're really happy to have you here. And it was just a really nice way of being welcomed there. And I felt at home right away. And it really helped curb the homesickness that I felt for, you know, home in Canada. And, you know, it was just a nice way to break the ice and to really get started on my whole year that was to come in northern Germany. I didn't find out until afterwards, though, that the reason they were all there that day was because they heard that there was an Indian from Canada coming to their school. And they wanted to come and see what the Indian would look like. You know, they really only had a stereotypical image of Indians because of pop culture there, right? So a couple of weeks after that, I was hanging out with one of my new buddies. His name was Tim. And he said to me that he had an admission to make. He said, Wob, that day you showed up, we were actually really disappointed when we saw you. And I asked him why. And he said, well, you were wearing a t-shirt and jeans and you had short hair. And we're sort of expecting like an Indian in a loincloth with a feather in his long hair, right? And he was half joking and half serious, but it sort of showed me that there were a lot of stereotypes that I'd be coming up against during my whole year in Germany. So we had a laugh about it regardless. And it's one of the things I wrote about for one of my first articles that I faxed back to Canada for the Anishinaabe News. And it was really enlightening for me and really empowering for me to reflect on those differences and to be able to share them, you know, in the written form. And I knew that I had a lot to do in terms of busting myths about our people there, and that there was a lot to do back in Canada at the same time. So when the Anishinaabe News printed my first article, they put the address of the host family I was staying with at the bottom. And a couple of weeks after it first ran, I started getting letters from people, non-Indigenous and Indigenous people in Canada, who had read that story and were very encouraged by my presence there in Germany and the stuff I was doing to raise awareness of Indigenous issues and realities. And for me, it was really the moment that I knew that change could happen through the written word, that journalism was a viable platform for people like me to share the experiences of others, to educate Canadians especially, because there was a huge awareness gap then. It continues today, but then there was a lot more work to be done, because even though I was met with genuine enthusiasm in Germany, my peers there really wanted to know about me and my culture, and they were really happy to do so. I recalled my time growing up in the Parry Sound area, which is a town surrounded by 5 First Nations, and there just wasn't that same level of enthusiasm. And although it was a little disheartening to consider at first, it really inspired me to do the work a lot harder, to come home and to tell people stories through journalism and raise awareness and educate Canadians on the gaps that resulted because of the education system and because of the neglect of mainstream media in general. So I got home, had 1 year of high school to do. Then I applied to Ryerson University's journalism program. And that's where I ended up graduating from university in 2002 and ended up going on a very long and, you know, beneficial career, mostly at the CBC. And throughout that time, you know, I've made it my life's work to share Indigenous realities in journalism, in the written word, in broadcasting, and so on. And it's what I want to continue to do for the rest of my life. So that moment of learning the power of the written word and the opportunities through journalism for our people to share their realities is what made me realize that real change could happen in this world. And as a result, I'm hopeful for the future, and I will continue to do this work until the end. Chimigwech.
Hello, I am Jan Arden. I do a lot of things. I used to say I was a singer-songwriter, and then it's changed so much over the years, which is an amazing thing. And I'm lucky to be doing all the things that I do for one reason only. And that is because of my sobriety, which I never thought that I would say in a bajillion years. It's a very exciting thing for me to say, to talk about sobriety, and to talk about sobriety in terms of hope, in terms of positivity, in terms of casting shame aside. So that's been big for me. I've been sober for just over 4 years. How I managed to kind of stagger through the first 25 years of my career, I find somewhat astounding. But I never stopped trying to become the person that I wanted to become. And I will go back a little bit to tell you that there's a few things that I do know for sure. And the first thing is that good things come out of bad things. Good things come out of bad things. My first example of really realizing that at this point in my life was to be able to look back at these markers that become much more clear as you get older. But the first marker of a good thing turning into a bad thing was the fact that my father was an alcoholic, which may sound ludicrous. But because of his alcoholism, I actually started down the road of becoming a singer-songwriter and the artist that I am today. Because of my dad's alcoholism, I went into the basement of my parents' house. I snuck down there because he was unpredictable. And when you're 10 years old, 11 years old, having an unpredictable parent that is an alcoholic, trust me, the irony isn't lost on me, because the last thing I ever wanted to be was like my dad. However, I go down to the basement, and in the basement was all of my brother's record collection, an old turntable, and a guitar that sat perched in the corner. And just out of sheer necessity to entertain myself, I started teaching myself how to play guitar. I would never, ever have gone into the basement because we lived on an acreage. I was outside all the time. But the only reason I went into the basement, trust me, was because I just needed to get away from my dad and get away from the constant combat zone that he was. So that was my first example of a good thing coming out of a bad thing. I don't know how my life would have turned out. I often think about that, of what direction it would have taken. But as you roll along in your life and as you get older, you're able to look at these things with a lot more clarity. And the hardest things in my life, the things that I went through because of the poor choices that I made, I don't think I would change a single one of them, because failure became such a good thing in my life. It became such a positive, amazing tool. I have never learned anything from getting it right. I've never learned anything from my triumphs or winning an award or succeeding the first time out. Don't know about you, but I'm a champion at screwing up. I have epic failures that I'm continually amazed by. Drinking was one of them. I think the path that I carved out for myself as a young adult was one filled with a lot of shame and a lot of regret. I've always admired people that have somehow managed to get through life saying that they have no regrets. And that's not my story at all. I have so many regrets. I have regrets that sneak up on me on a Sunday afternoon like a bolt of lightning and just shoot through my chest, enough where I draw in a breath because I'll think of something that I did a long time ago. And it actually like just pierces my organs and my heart and my lungs. And it really gives me time to pause. And I take that bad thing, that memory, and I'm so grateful that I'm able to sit quietly and take it out of its jar and really look at it and examine it and learn from it. So I would never change the really stupid things that I did. I would never go back and alter a single thing, because good things do come out of bad things. Another great example, just as we go down to this last minute here, I was turned down by every record company in the world many times. The last fellow that had my cassette tape listened to it in his car. He was 26 years old, wanted to, hire a rock band. Anyway, he turned me down. He phoned my manager, and after 5 years of us trying to get a record deal, he was like the last guy on the line, and he just said, I don't see any interest to sign Jan Arden. Fast forward, the next day, his girlfriend broke up with him, broke his heart, called off the wedding. Alan took a week off. He was wounded. When he got back into his car a few days later, guess whose cassette was still in the deck? Mine. He put it in, and the first song that came on was a song called I Just Don't Love You Anymore. Good things come out of bad things. Alan's bad thing turned out to be my good thing. He understood what I'd done, and he got it. It resonated with him, and he phoned us back, and he said, I don't know if Jan Arden's ever going to sell a record, but we're going to sign her. And I signed for a 10-album record deal with A&M Records. So good things come out of bad things. Steady on, everybody, and look after yourself.
Thank you so much, Sandy Hudson, Valerie Plant, Anand Gurdadas, Wab Rice, and Jan Arden. Incredible stories that I'm sure we'll all be thinking about. If you enjoyed tonight's talks, we have more. On November 26th, you can join us for the Walrus Talks at Home, Housing, a conversation about why it matters for all. Also, visit us online at thewalrus.ca/events to browse our schedule to see what we have coming up. Also, you can access videos from our previous talks in the Walrus Talks video room. The Walrus is a registered charity, and we produce our award-winning journalism, events, and podcasts thanks to our community of support. This includes donors, sponsors, and partners. So thank you again to Ed Broadbent, Rick Smith, Josh Bizjack, and everyone at the Broadbent Institute for making this conversation tonight possible. Thank you also to our annual sponsors at the Walrus, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to Rick now.
Wow, thank you so much, Jen, for that incredible and uplifting journey. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers. You're incredibly busy people, especially these days, and we are honored you took a few minutes with us tonight. Your stories have touched us all and surely inspired us to take action in our own lives and in our communities. Thank you to the incredible staff of the Broadbent Institute and the Walrus for their hard work in putting this event together. Thank you to the production team that handled the technology, and to all of our sponsors. Last but certainly not least, thanks to you who've spent the last hour with us. We really appreciate your joining us. You can find the Broadbent Institute online at broadbentinstitute.ca. We're on all your social feeds. Please stay in touch. And if you join our email list, we're going to be sure to let you know of our upcoming digital convenings, including our amazing annual Progress Summit, which will be online in 2021 in the spring. Thanks again. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great night.